Theodore White is a journalist who has committed himself to coverage of the most powerful office in the world, the presidency of the United States. More particularly, the election process which selects one man above all others to occupy that role. His quadrennial series, The Making of the President, has covered the ascension of Jack Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and twice of Richard Nixon. He has a new book out which interrupts the sequence. It's entitled Breech of Faith, The Fall of Richard Nixon, and it seeks to offer some understanding of the political circumstances which led to Watergate and its aftermath. I'm Harold Hayes, and Mr. White is our guest at Roundtable tonight, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
You have, at the beginning of Chapter 3, a mea culpa, which has been quoted quite widely in some of the reviews. If I may, I'll quote it, and it's certainly an understandable one. For this reporter who, forgive me, I'll have to go to my glasses here, who passed successively from loathing for Richard Nixon to respect for him, then to inescapable recognition of his criminal guilt, the task of writing about him has been particularly difficult, as indeed I can imagine it would be. And in fact, it seems to me your book carries this tone of ambivalence throughout the entire structure of his career, which you deal with. When and why did you loathe him?
I've been a foreign correspondent for 15 years. I got back home in '53. By that time, Richard Nixon had already become the chief hatchet man of the Republican Party. I'd read of the Voorhees stuff and the Helen Hagman Douglas stuff had happened. I thought this was a man of unrelieved evil. And then you go through 20 more years of life making politics. I love American politics.
It's quite apparent that you do, yes.
It's the most marvelous exercise in power in the whole world. And you come to know a man, and it's so difficult to hate a man when you do come to know him. I guess I can chart the steps. China's always been a matter of, enormous importance to me.
And he used it as a club, didn't he?
No, he didn't. I remember speaking to him in 1967. He was lonesome and miserable here in New York. He was an outcast in New York society, dropping into an apartment house one day, and he was saying the very first thing we've got to do is recognize Red China. And I'd been advocating that for years. I saw him go through the presidency.
This was in 67?
67, before, when his campaign was just getting underway. I thought he was just kidding me, but he meant it. I'm somewhat of an environmentalist. I do believe if we don't control our world, we are an endangered species. There was a magnificent environmental program put through in the Nixon administration. We did get a peace. We got a détente with Russia. The draft, I loathed the draft. I think the draft was one of the two most corrupt systems in the USA, the other being election financing. And so finally, after 20 years, you even begin to like the men you loathe. We'd both been in politics for a long time. We could talk with a degree of what I thought was candor between each other. I respected so much of what he did in his first term. That was this enormous, it was like something exploding me to slowly find myself wrenched in 1973 to begin to question how much had this man been deceiving the American people. I was dragged kicking and screaming downstairs to a conviction that if I had been a congressman or a senator, I would have voted Richard Nixon guilty and unfit for office. Now, that's not an easy conclusion. It may have been for liberals a conclusion that they came to years ago. For myself, it was a very difficult conclusion. But in the end, he deceived. He deceived his party. He deceived his family. He deceived the people. He deceived the people who were most loyal to him. And I can invent, if I had to, I can invent a justification for the kind of crimes that always happen. But you can't invent the justification for the lying and lying and lying again and the deception and the final conclusion of the American people that their president was a liar. That's, I suppose, why I called the book Breech of Faith, because you have to, this may sound naive, if you don't believe in something, then a country doesn't exist. They didn't win in South Vietnam because they had superior arms. There were people who were willing to go out and die for what they believed in. At one time, Americans believed, I think you were in World War II, At one time, Americans would go and fight and die because they trusted their president. If you don't trust your president as a man of law, then we really don't exist as an organized society. And that's what he
You have held in all your books that the presidency is an ennobling process, that a man may come to it with humble or modest talents, but once in the office, it's a near religious.
It's sacerdotal, it's priestly. They have to believe, the people out there have to believe. You draft kids from home and you send them to die, their parents and the kids themselves have got to believe that they're dying for something more than themselves. The presidency has to be sacerdotal.
But was Nixon the first president who betrayed that faith? And I'm curious to know, Mr. White, let me add to it before you start to peel it away. Because it seems to me that in your several books, your own faith built in the presidency and in the system through the men that you saw moving into that role. In fact, I believe you said in one of your earlier books that few men in his time had done as much good as Lyndon Johnson. How do you now review your own assumptions with respect to the men who have become president through the time that you have been covering them so assiduously, insofar as to whether, in fact, they have been so ennobled?
Well, that I have made mistakes I will not deny. I suppose the biggest mistake I made when I was operating on a day-to-day basis was in judging Dwight D. Eisenhower. I thought he was a do-nothing president. I would rank him very much higher now than I did then. We've had a run. If you take Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy, 30 years of leaders who were as classy and as far-seeing and as good as any other civilization of that time and that period. With Johnson, I think something went off the tracks. Johnson and Nixon, I think, between them cover a decade which is the greatest non-vintage decade in American politics since Rutherford B. Hayes. I think Truman was a man who was truly and seriously ennobled and uplifted and made finer by the office. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a snob from the upper Hudson, mildly anti-Semitic, no sense whatsoever of grief striking him personally, and yet there somehow came into him a compassion and a sense that the presidency is an office which must be used for the good of the people. And his name, I must sound to you as if I'm making a 4th of July oration.
No.
But Franklin D. Roosevelt...
Your book certainly qualifies much of what you're saying at this first line. But the ignobling process is what interests me from your book. And you cite, for example, the avarice of Richard Nixon, who had for many years been a poor, struggling, honest politician, and who became very much concerned with acquiring wealth once in office. And you also cite Dwight Eisenhower and Lyndon Johnson.
Hungry men.
And who came out wealthy.
Who came out very wealthy. IRS got was spectacularly privileged by the income tax on the royalties of his books. He could take them not as income but as capital gains. Lyndon Johnson I would rank as one of the poorer presidents of the USA right now. But the ignobling of Richard Nixon, I think money is a sidetrack. The ignobling of Richard Nixon was that intoxication of power, the sense that the law was putty. If you get into the White House, it's the most hushed office in the world. And I think the most beautiful of all the major seats of state. But there are so many hidden buttons there that you can press. There's an intoxication of power. And everybody all around the president has that sense of you lift the phone and say, White House calling, and somebody half a world away will quiver and lift that and cut off any phone call. I believe that he felt that he was above the law. This is what I consider an ignobling process. We all of us have a streak of Walter Mitty in us, and I think presidents more than most. I think the Walter Mitty streak in Richard Nixon became almost abnormal. That June 23rd conversation of his, the emotional build-up to that. I don't believe he thought he was consciously committing a crime. I believe he had lost the sense of what was right and wrong because of the power concentrated there. The world twitches to your fingertips.
Well, wouldn't Lyndon Johnson have been characterized in precisely the same terms as a man whose megalomania had got to the point that he knew better than anybody else or any other institution what was good
I
for
shall
all?
enter upon no encomiums for Lyndon B. Johnson on this program. As I say, you revise constantly. He did a good job in domestic politics. But he took
also
us into-
wiretapped, too, didn't he?
This we don't know. You see, if you ask me to speculate, I would say yes. But he didn't wiretap newsmen.
What was the 5 o'clock club that you...
The 5 o'clock club was the Dirty Tricks Club of Lyndon Johnson.
I had not heard of that till I read this in your book. Is that
He
common
had,
knowledge?
they met at the White House at 5 o'clock every day, and there was no cutoff as Haldeman cut himself off from Segretti. And how they managed to get the advanced texts of Barry Goldwater speeches, what their espionage system was like on Barry Goldwater, I will never know. But they had it. Barry Goldwater could have conversations with his two most trusted lieutenants, and their ideas and schemes would be in LBJ's 5 o'clock club the next day. Dirty Tricks is no new thing, Harold. I think it first was elevated to a White House level by LBJ. And I think from there on, clumsily and oafishly and stupidly, the Nixon men mechanized it. You know, it wasn't done with any artistry whatsoever. Segretti was as close to a damn fool as you can possibly imagine. Can you imagine a young jerk of however old he was, 28, 29, flying into a place like Tampa, Florida, calling Republican national headquarters, calling local Republican headquarters, and asking the switchboard operator if she could suggest a name for him to do some secret work? I mean, this is the lowest grade kind of dirty tricks. Clumsy, foolish, awkward, malicious, despicable, but in no way affecting the outcome of the election. I'm certain Nixon was... I've never been in a campaign, Harold, where there hasn't been, under whatever rubric used, an intelligence and espionage operation. And that's okay. If it's in politics, okay. But government is something else again. In government, you're sworn to execute the law. You don't do those things. If
A question occurs to me out of all this is that we are so much now awash in the aftermath of Watergate and the strain of credulity that's felt by the people and by the press. How much of a re-examination will we be going through for the next few years on our most recent presidents, not only Lyndon Johnson? You mentioned in your book that Jack Kennedy had extensive taping that was known to only a few, and that these are in the archives and are being studied now.
Well, I think they're being, they may be vetted there in the archives at Waltham, Massachusetts, yes indeed. There's been taping off and on in the White House since the days of Franklin D. Roosevelt. I don't like it. A man's got the right to tape himself. That's okay. The president certainly has a right to tape conversations with conversations of state. I have the right to tape myself, and I would not tape myself in conversation with you unless I told you, Mr. Hayes, I'm taping. I will allow certain privileges to a president. But the Supreme Court put its finger on it when it said the president indeed has executive privilege, but he has no privilege to withhold evidence from the law in a criminal action. And there was a criminal action in balance there and under adjudication at that point. The Supreme Court said your privilege does not extend to withholding the tapes.
Well, of course, the tapes are what brought him down.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it does not then follow that it's to the advantage of the institution of government that a president be taped. That this become an aspect of his conduct of office, so that there is some kind of responsibility directly to the people for what he does.
You're so gentle. I hate to say to you that this is a very naive view
Go
of how
ahead. It's been
you
said
were.
before.
You were an editor of Esquire. You ran Esquire. Would you want the conversation, story conferences, Esquire, while you were there, taped?
There, so far as I know, there was no comparable Watergate experience at Esquire. May have been, but
you need, a president requires candor when he's considering appointing a man and he calls in his advisors and they say, who, that jerk? Or somebody says, we've called in the FBI and here's his record. A president needs the confidentiality of thinking.
where would this country be if we had not discovered what had happened with Watergate?
probably Richard Nixon would still be president.
Would there be a substantive
but-
change and difference in our nature of government and the way we live and the whole institution of this democracy as we know it?
It's not the taping that bothers me there. There's something else going, Harold. See if I can
Please.
make it clear. There's the input of 20 years of politics into that presidency. Everything has been shoved into Washington. Where you send your kid to school, whether your son is drafted, the price of milk, your wages, your airlines, your symphony orchestra, all those things have been thrust into Washington. Washington has structured, the structure of the presidency can now no longer control all these myriad disparate things that are going on. You can't have an energy policy unless the president has an energy policy. I think Nixon, to answer your question specifically and why I would ignore for the moment the felonious aspects of the Nixon presidency, he had come to the conclusion that the presidency had to be restructured. They called it the 6-point star plan, in which the cabinet would be demoted to an administrative or an executive body, but policy, high national policy, would be set by the president and an inner council. And do you know something? I think that's a good idea, except that if it's crooks or lawbreakers on that inner council, it terrifies me. I think what terrified Congress in the end, and the Judiciary Committee specifically, were not the actual crimes that had been committed, but what might happen in the future with an all-powerful president, remote from his cabinet, not even seeing his cabinet, dealing through a staff of White House agents similar to the way the Politburo deals with the state commissariats of Russia, that there would be almost a constitutional change in the way our country operates. It was that frightened Congress. It's that frightened me most about what lay ahead in the Nixon administration.
What are the safeguards that are coming out of all this that will assure this not happening in the future?
I think you have to reconcile yourself to the fact that there can't be any safeguards. We have this rather mad new Campaign Finance Act which is trying to get money out of politics, and I don't think this Campaign Finance Act is going to work. You can't legislate against sin. It's a matter of gambling on the future of democracy. It's a matter of hoping that this episode has been self-purgative. You cannot state in the Constitution the president must be an honest man and a decent man. You can't pass legislation that way. It's up to the rhythm, the feeling, the gut emotions of the American people to choose the right president to do their will.
You say, setting aside the felonious aspects of what he did, in your very eloquent peroration at the end of your book, he destroyed the myth. He sought to destroy the myth for Americans. What do you mean by that?
The myth that this is a government of laws. We are not like the British, the French, the Russians, whose nationhood descends to us by genetics. We are the most polyglot, multiracial society in the world. So we have no common heritage except really the legends of the Constitution, of George Washington and the cherry tree, of Abraham Lincoln, of Franklin D. Roosevelt. We have nothing to believe in. We have no ethnic or racial superiority to believe in. Nothing to believe in except our Constitution and the supremacy of law and the equality of all men before the law. The one person where that thing pivots, we have 2 ex-governors of the Union in jail right now, several congressmen in jail, several more congressmen in jail. That's not going to hurt us. But when you cease to trust your president as an honest man, all things break. To give you an example, it would not have occurred a few weeks ago we had the Mayaguez episode. I can go through half a dozen parlors in New York City and have people tell me that it was a put-up job by the CIA, that we're being hoodwinked or fooled or bamboozled once more by the White House. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. We are coming into a world of crises, coming into a world of energy shortages. The third world is in revolt and it's changing. You have to follow a leader. Congress can't lead. You have to believe that your president is a man of law. In breaking that myth, I think he shattered something, and we don't know how fast it can be put together again.
Well, it was also the fact that, and perhaps this subsumes under what you're saying, a series of lies he was caught in. That is, the breach of faith was a breach of trust in the credibility of the man and the office.
From the common 5 and 10 cent store lie to the big $2 economy size lie to the cosmic lies that he told. All those are true. Beyond that is the fact that at the end nobody trusted him.
Let me ask you, at the risk of phrasing another question naively, do you think people in this country really believe politicians tell the truth?
You know something? I think an awful lot of people do. That's my trade, politics. By and large, they should. Oh, they'll
I was
seduce.
struck very
Oh,
much
come
by,
on.
I was struck very much by watching Senator Eugene Talmadge ask very high-minded questions of Ehrlichman, very moralizing questions. And I sat there and remembered when Eugene Talmadge seized the governor's office of the state of Georgia in 48 or 49 with the assistance of the state police without having properly been elected to the office. I remembered having covered Georgia politics back in those days and having him say that as long as he was in office, no colored child would ever get into a Georgia school.
Rotten.
So that the truth, if you'd ask me from my naivete, would be that I don't really expect a hell of a lot of truth from most politicians. And I wonder really how many people do today.
They don't today. I'm going to, I hope you don't think this is a put down,
No,
Harold.
please, it's all right.
I spent 15 years as a foreign correspondent. And the men I met in China, or in Eastern Europe, or in Germany, or in France, were of so corrupt a nature, so cruel, such killers. I came back to the USA with a sense of relief having seen politics overseas. Now, politics is
It's a
courtship.
question of degree, though, is what you're saying.
All right, politics is courtship. When you're courting a girl, you tell her more lies than you can shake a stick at. It's part of the nature. In politics, you're courting the people. When you're in government, you're married, and you have to live up to it. I honestly believe that we have got better legislators than any other freely elected legislature in the world. Now, that will vary from state to state. I take Minnesota as a really classy state. Wisconsin, again, a classy state. California, for some reason, although its politics are cruel and brutal, has a pretty honest assembly. More honest now than it was 20 years ago when the lobbyists were running it. If you want me to say all politicians are crooks, no.
I don't mean to suggest that myself, but I think that it is a natural condition of being political, as you agree, that one lies. And as in fact, you said in your own book that until the action betrays the lie, a politician is performing his function by telling whatever he has to in order to justify his action.
You. He's playing the flute and leading you along, and he has to do that.
But I much more appreciated your analysis suggesting that what we had got caught up with in this country was the use of power. That is, of being a world power since World War II and the obligations of power all the way down the line or up the line to the presidency, of supporting whatever we said was the way it was supposed to be. That was our commitment in this country to what we were. And what it caused me to wonder is really whether we had not lost, irretrievably almost, some sense of ourselves as a people, our function as a society.
There's what you call a degeneration of command. Let me agree with you, but take it this way. No solution in politics lasts for more than 20 years. Every solution of one generation becomes the trap and prison of another generation. There was a time from 1945 to 48 when Europe would have starved, literally, when the harvest went out in 1947 in Western Europe, when democracy would have crumbled in Italy, in France, in England, when we did move massively to save Western Europe, and magnificently, I may add. And NATO, again, I was in Berlin in 48. It wasn't us pressing the Russians at Berlin in 48. It was the Russians giving the shiv to us. I saw those Red Army soldiers marching across the borderline to that Russian memorial. That 48, 49, the solutions we took, NATO and the Marshall Plan, were absolutely correct in their day, but they're 20 years out of date. And it's time for us to rid ourselves of that illusion that we are the prime, the dominant, and the history-making power of the world. That's 20 years ago. I supported those policies. I think they were correct in those days. I think they're totally obsolete right now. I don't think
And we have none to replace them.
The sterility of American political thinking right now, Harold, amazes me. There are no ideas going. What you have going for you is the ideas of the 1930s against the ideas of the 1960s. There is nothing with which to grip the reality of America today. The liberal solutions of the 60s, some worked, and some were disasters. And I think the greatest sense of melancholy I get is going around the country, talking to people, and finding this intellectual desert of American life. We have no energy policy. We have no urban policy. We have no overall economic policy. And I think basically we can say that, if I may include you and possibly myself in the category of intellectuals, we intellectuals are at fault. We've become too fat, perhaps. We've become too fashionable, certainly. We mouth the same old phrases, and they have very little relevance to what's going on in this country today.
It's our obligation and everyone's to try to come up with more ideas.
That's right.
You'll probably want to read this. There's a whole lot more in it than what we've been talking about tonight. It's a great pleasure talking with you, Teddy White. Thanks for coming around.
Harold, thank you very much for asking me.
Good night. I'm Harold Hayes.